Let's get to work on some interesting smaller jobs, some cool instruments. It's nice to kind of space out the massive undertakings with something I can get done in a day. There's this weird balance that has to be struck. People want to watch the super long involved videos with the rare historic instruments, but making those is, well, it's a prolonged experience. And the content creation paradigm demands sustaining cash flow with stuff that comes in and goes out again without a whole lot of delay. I'm working on another great big job, which you'll see soon. We're going to start off with a Les Paul Jr. Yes, I know it looks like an SG. We covered this last semester. You were responsible for the reading. This is from that strange amorphous period when a Les Paul was also an SG. And in fact, this is from the year that Les Paul decided he no longer wanted them to be Les Pauls and they should be SGs without his name on it. This is from 1963. I think that's a good year. There it is, Les Paul's signature still on it. Les did not like the design of the SG, of course. Well, the necks on them are quite whippy, the bodies are very thin, the attachment point is way far down the neck, and the early tenon attachments for these things are, well, they just don't leave a whole lot of support, so you're very easily going out of tune, which is something Les didn't like. Plus, would you look at this thing? The shape, the horns, it's infernal. It was designed for metal. It didn't have a vehicle for 10 years, you know? Are you going to take this to your upscale New York supper club gig, playing the Billboard hits of the day? You know what those songs were in 1961? It's no Tony Iommi or Angus Young. Ronnie James Dio's grandma is showing horns, but even Ronnie is probably singing Roy Orbison, crying. Got Connie Francis, who passed away the other day. Condolences. But you going to play this along with Where the Boys Are? Bobby V. Take good care of my baby. Played with an SG? Come on. That's the state of things. The hardest rock of that year was Dion's Runaround Sue. That's really a sax vehicle, isn't it? I had to look it up just to make sure, and there is some good footage. Here's Dion's back line doing the hit, hit. In the middle, we've got a 1940s L5, outfitted with a De-Armond monkey on a stick pickup. But over there on the left, this is going to be a very early Fender Custom Telecaster with the bound body and slab rosewood fretboard. I hope that guy's grandkids still have that one. This guitar, even though it's 1963, still has the wide nut. This is 1 11/16, the full size. That's around 42 plus millimeters. Over the years, they did get skinnier and skinnier to the point where they were like 1 9/16, which some people can deal with. My fingers disagree. Actually, I have to talk about this neck shape. It's really kind of interesting. It's fairly normal at the nut end. It feels, I mean, it's not small by any means. It's not super skinny. But by the time we're around the 9th, 10th fret, it starts to get thicker and thicker until around the 14th. It's super clubby. It's half a baseball bat. It's really interesting. I don't think I've encountered one that is exactly this shape before, and I very much like it. You know, one of the long-standing issues with the SG design is that it's unbalanced. The bodies are so thin and light that the neck tends to want to dip towards the floor, especially if you're using, you know, the original strap button placement, you know, on the back here. Things just kind of want to tip forward, which is disconcerting. But in this case, there's enough mass in this neck area that it balances somewhere around here. And that's kind of amazing. Again, I've never seen that before. You'll often see them retrofitted with a button on the horn here, which is difficult to do in a satisfying way. Visually, it just looks weird. But even then, if you take your hands off the neck, you know, the headstock can bloop downwards. You know, I've mentioned in the past that the vibrola systems Gibson put on some of these tend to add sort of much needed counterbalance. They're quite weighty, and that can sort of help keep the body where you want it. To exacerbate the neck dive issue, oftentimes when these original Kluson tuners, 3 on a plate, would start to get a little bit cantankerous and difficult to turn, would probably be the 70s. They'd get swapped out for usually Grover Rotomatics, the sealed gear tuners, which weigh about twice as much, so you're adding that much more weight to the end of the seesaw. These guys here, 63 would be the last year for the single line Clousons. It says Clouson Deluxe down the center of the tuner. They eventually go with double line, Clouson on one side, Deluxe on the other, starting in 64. So this thing is an official Gibson. It did take a tumble at some point, and there was pretty fearsome looking fracture. And I believe it's been repaired. My job is to check and make sure that it really has and that it's not open and that it's going to be stable. The plastic in these old pick guards is getting quite fragile. No, I would not change that. That's wonderful. It's part of the character. These juniors have a wrap tail piece. One of the things that makes them a junior. These are student model instruments after all. And you can see that at this point there's virtually no downward mobility. The backs of these guitars are frequently much redder than the tops. The cherry dye used in the lacquer is very fugitive with any exposure to light. Stock looking electronics. They were using the ceramic disc capacitors at this point. Still have that nice yellow shrink tubing on their ground wire. And always a lot of, they must have had either really heavy rosin core solder or they were using some kind of flux that left this sort of goopy stuff around the actual solder beads. Let's have a look at the date code on the pot, which is the first number at the top there. 134 stands for Centralab. That's the manufacturing code. 63 is the year, 1963, and then it's 20, I think it's 24, so it would be the 24th week of 1963. I'm not sure if these are the original frets or not. Now, this guitar has not got a whole lot of play wear on it, and they seem to be about the right size, but I think they've been recrowned. This would be the first generation of jumbo wire, just over 100 thousandths wide by probably around 50 thousandths tall. Yep. And much, much larger than the wire that Gibson was using on its electrics in the 50s. I believe this change happened in 1960, which of course, you know, Les Paul himself would have hated this too. He was the one who really pushed for the fretless wonder idea. He wanted very low frets. 50 thousandths would have been like railroad tracks to him. He would not have liked it. The action doesn't seem to be too bad. Yeah, just around 4/64ths, which is lower than it would have been from the factory. And on the treble side, just a hair under 3/64ths. So yeah, most people would consider that pretty darn good for this age. And the relief too, yeah, there's only about 4 or 5 thousandths there. So this is a very straight neck. Okay, I can see what he means. These are exceptionally tight, at least to start off with. Yeah, quite snug. Looking at the face of the headstock, I can see that there's evidence that this used to have different tuners on it, and it looks like they were probably that set of Grovers we were mentioning before. They have a much larger washer that goes in them. It'll be interesting to see how they handled the difference in size between the Grover post hole and the original, because the Grovers take a much larger, they have to be sized up to 10 millimeters. These are just over 1/4 of an inch. So these most recent tuners are not exactly centered in the previous outlines from the other washers. And I think I can see a plug here. So some of that tightness might have to do with just the accuracy of the hole drilling. It's not always that easy to get those holes exactly where they need to be. You have to be accurate. And it really helps if you have a good quality drilling jig. Eyeballing it won't do. You can see there, poking out from underneath the ferrule. There's also some finish touch-up here, which is not uncommon. The headstocks on these always take a beating. I managed to pull this one off with a little hassle, and you can see very definite evidence of the plug. The owner wondered if maybe trying out a different set of tuners would help. He got a set of these Golden Age replacement tuners. I gotta be honest, I hate this color. I wish StewMac wouldn't sell this one. It's just way too blue. It doesn't look like any tuner, ever. If it was brown, yeah. Just go with the bright nickel instead. Don't put the blue ones on. There we go. Mahogany plugs. Well, here's the cause of that binding issue, I think. Measuring from the inside wall to the bottom of the next ferrule, you can see that this low E-string is probably 1 millimeter off as it comes out the front surface. Sometimes they're more even on the underside. Now, just looking at it, I can tell that's wrong. I'll use my plug cutter to cut some plugs. Reaming stuff is more fun than drilling. In this case, my plug cutter makes a slightly tapered plug as well, so this works better. Here's a tip. The previous plugs were done with mahogany, which is the wood I used for the plug on the back side. Now the front face of these guitars is painted, but it's also been pore-filled, or it will have a veneer of a wood that does not have prominent grain, like maple, or in this case pear wood. That's what I've made the plug for the top side with. And that will mean that I won't end up with this sort of raggedy appearance, and I won't have to try and pore fill it before I do a drop fill. So, you know, a smooth wood like maple or pear is probably the way to go for your top surface plugs. Blue velvet, mahogany were her eyes. Now, the previous brake has been glued together firmly. I don't see very much movement going on there. However, there is one little spot on the back side here that comes up from the screw holes, which does appear like it might be open enough to use some glue. The scary part of the whole brake is fine though. That's really down there, good and flat, so not to worry there, but this one I want to put glue in. Wu-Tang tells it like it is. You got to protect your neck when you're clamping. Even though I'm suspecting the misaligned hole has a lot to do with the ease of turning, these are still quite stiff. That one's okay. This set here is really a struggle. And, I mean, what can happen is, over time, the grease that's in these can solidify and basically act more like glue than grease. So I'm going to clean these out. I'm just going to submerge them in mineral spirits, paint thinner. Got this little old box here which is just about the right size. I don't really want the buttons sitting in the cleaner. I know Dan Erlewine likes to use naphtha for this. I use mineral spirits. Just let that sit for a few minutes. A bunch of dark looking gunk gets flushed out. Actually tap it out of them. I'm going to use a little bit of light machine oil on the bearing surfaces on either side, and also down in the gear itself through the little hole. I'll saw off the excess with a flush cut saw, protecting the surface with a scrap of plastic here, as you can see. We'll pare off the excess on both sides using a very sharp chisel. These holes have to be drilled with a level of precision that's, well, it's beyond simply marking with a pencil, you know. without a drill guide, the results are rarely acceptable. I'll ream the top of the hole so the bushing will be a snug fit. Don't want to push it in all the way now because I wouldn't be able to get it back out again easily. But I'll go ahead and I'll lightly chamfer the top surface using a countersink bit. I took some of my favorite black lacquer, sprayed it into a paper cup, and I'll just do a couple of coats. A light drop fill here. I'm not going out of my way to disguise all of the history on this headstock. That's a pretty long process because if you're going to do a little bit, you got to do it all. Polishing, polishing, polishing. The owner has acquired one of these Savvy model bridges from Music City. These are slightly lower in profile than the usual compensated bridge, so that you get a little bit more height adjustment out of them. For some reason, the treble side screw had been installed backwards. I'm looking for the recess for the hex key, and it's not there. There was a moment of panic. I realized, oh, it's on the inside. There's an evocative little bit of tan line there, a splash of cherry under the bridge position. These Music City bridges are really nicely machined, so they fit in there and there's no slop. I've been giving this set of strings that is a bit of an oddball, 9.5 to 44. That's a little strange. I need to raise the bridge to re-establish the action height. I have a screwdriver which I've specially ground for this purpose. Fits the slots properly. You can see there's now space under the bridge that we could lower the action if necessary. In this case, it wasn't necessary. On some juniors, however, it would be necessary. Setting the intonation points. Don't do this under string tension, trying to move that bridge. It's an aluminum bridge with a steel set screw. You are in danger of stripping it out. There's one little light colored lacquer bruise here, which I've been looking at all day, and I think I want to do something with. Make that less obvious. Better. Problem is, once you do one, all the others start to look inviting too. That's enough. That color, rather than cherry red, was a Prismacolor walnut. Well, we're all set. The tuners are now much easier to use. You can actually turn them now, which is somewhat important. Not like brand new tuners, mind you, but like a decent set that are 60 years old and have been looked after. I think the owner will find them sufficient. If for some reason he doesn't, maybe we order an appropriate set of replacement Clousons. You know, I straddle a strange line sometimes where I'm tasked with making vintage guitars playable, but I'm also expected to be a custodian of history or something. You know, if a worn out part has a direct replacement available that looks and functions like the old one, that would always be my preference. Try not to modify stuff unnecessarily. Same thing kind of applies to the bridge, you know. Was there anything really wrong with the old one? Well, it was a little bit buzzy. The height adjustment issue wasn't really an issue because you wouldn't want lower action on this guitar. You would end up with the strings too close to the pickup and they would be, you know, buzzing on the frets too. This is about as low as they'd go. Well, that's part of the magic equation on these juniors again. You know, trying to get the bridge height, the pickup height, and the action height all in the same kind of ballpark. It's a fairly narrow range. And does the artfully sculpted Music City bridge cure all ailments? I really like these bridges, but realize there's always a small trade-off if you play anything other than 10 to 46 gauge strings. Like the 9.5 high E, you wouldn't think, but it does. It's always going to be a fraction flat at the octave with all of the rest of the strings ringing true. Just a tiny bit. If that's the kind of thing that would bother you, you would be playing a much different guitar. Hopefully you would know that about yourself, right? As it stands, this is a really fun one to play.